This Mother's Day, our sponsor, Hero Generation, is celebrating the incredible stories of caregiving and motherhood. So, whether you're a mom caring for a loved one or someone caring for your mom, or know of a wonderful mom that they should feature, they would like to honor your journey. They'll be featuring heartfelt stories from the community of the platform to recognize the love, strength, resilience of moms everywhere. So share your caregiving story through the link provided in our episode description. They would love to hear from you. And with all of those meaningful connections in our life, especially for those living with dementia, I'm proud to partner with Zinnia TV. Their calming, engaging videos are designed to reduce anxiety, bring moments of joy, create a little bit of respite in our day as caregivers. So whether you are a caregiver, a family member, a senior living community professional, Zinnia meets your loved ones where they are. Visit zinniatv.com and use the code GATHER20 for 20% off an annual subscription. What does caregiving really ask of us emotionally, mentally, spiritually? What happens inside of us when we are called to care for someone we love? Beneath the to-do list, the sleepless night lives this truth that caregiving does change us. It can strip us down, reshape our identity, and ask us to find meaning in all of it. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Barry Jacobs, a clinical psychologist, family therapist, and longtime caregiver himself. He is the author of the Emotional Survival Guide for Caregivers and the upcoming AARP Caregiver Answer book. Gary brings decades of insight in what it really means to show up for others while we try to hold on to ourselves. We talk about the emotional toll of caregiving, the guilt that lingers, and the loneliness that can come. He's going to share some real practical ways to help us manage our anxiety, protect our identity, and build resistance. This episode is for anyone in the thick of it and anyone who is unraveling to rebuild and who just needs to hear you are not alone. Here is my interview with Dr. Barry Jacobs. Really looking forward to having you, Barry. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for having me. This is an honor for me.
It's been really fun. I think we've both been witnessing each other's sharing and work, and now we finally get to have a conversation. So very, very excited. Looking forward to learning from you. You have such a wealth of knowledge to share, and you've dedicated your career to supporting families and caregivers aging. What initially drew you to this work? Tell us more about that.
I think, like many folks that work with older adults or just work in caregiving, what drew me to the field was my own personal family experience. So when I was 14, my father was diagnosed with brain cancer, and he lived for about a year after that. My family went through a very hard time while he was ill. My mother, who had been a housemaker prior to that, had to go and take two jobs to try to make up for my father's income. My dad had been a lawyer who was a litigator, and his first symptom of cancer was that he was unable to speak. He no longer had the capacity to use intelligible language. And so right overnight, as soon as he was diagnosed, he was out of work. My mother was out of the house working two jobs. And then after my father died, my family went through a very hard time financially. So I learned at a very early age that illness, particularly serious illness, is not an individual matter, it's a family matter.
Mhm.
And I became very interested in how families dealt with illness. My own family didn't do a really good job, and in hindsight. And so I somewhere along the line in my career as a psychologist, pretty early on, actually, I decided that I really wanted to help families do a better job than my own family has done, and that has meant focusing for almost 40 years now on family caregiving.
You were probably having that focus before there's been more of an awareness around it. And I'm sure in these conversations with family, you had to teach them and educate them on how it really is affecting their lives. They knew it was and they knew the challenge, but I think having the language to describe what they were going through and having your perspective on it, I'm sure has been very helpful for people.
I certainly hope so, Nicole. That's very nice of you to say. So what in the 1980s, when I first came into this field, there was a big movement to try to brand the term caregiver because there had been no term, and even now there's still some controversy around the term caregiver.
Right.
But with a term like caregiver, people could identify with a role, and they could also, and once they had identified themselves with the role, they could avail themselves of the services, the whole infrastructure we have built over the past 40, 50 years to support caregivers in the work that they do.
Yeah.
But that was much less organized 40 years ago, and it was also people were to this day are reluctant to identify themselves with that role. But people, family members, did not feel entitled to reach out for help. With the term caregiver, they now feel more able to do so without feeling embarrassed or humiliated.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, yeah, there's lots of different terminology, right? Care partner, care giver, and we interchange those. But I think overall, universally, caregiver allows us to find the resources that are available and be able to find the support and the help that's out there. So I agree with that. Having your writing and advocacy really focused on the emotional component, the emotional survival of caregivers. I'd like to hear your perspective on some of those biggest emotional hurdles that we as caregivers face, and why do these challenges often go unrecognized?
So I think we should start off by talking about what is a normal emotional reaction to having a loved one with a serious or progressive illness.
Yeah.
People feel a range of things. I mean, certainly they feel sad, they may feel angry, they may blame themselves or blame the care receiver or blame doctors for what's happened. One of the hallmarks of caregiving, unfortunately, is guilt. People feel like no matter how much they do, it's not enough, or they feel like they should have done something different, or when they make mistakes, they are very self-critical. So there's a whole range of feelings that people have, including feeling burdened by being a caregiver, feeling sometimes angry at having this dropped into their laps, disrupting the rest of their lives. And so the first thing I do when I work with psychotherapy clients is to help them normalize this range of feelings that they're having, because sometimes they feel guilty about the feelings of, say, anger or discomfort with being a caregiver. And
Mhm.
so I just want to let them know that all those feelings are normal and expectable, and they shouldn't be beating themselves up for those feelings. Um,
Yeah.
as a consequence of some of those feelings, particularly guilt, it makes caregivers more reluctant to reach out for help. And it makes them sometimes more intent on self-sacrifice. And what I mean by that is if they're feeling that they're not doing enough, then they redouble their efforts at trying to make a difference. And that often means that they don't come through in other things in their lives. Other parts of their family they may neglect, or they may neglect their job, or they certainly neglect their own self-care. And that puts, because of those emotional reactions and the behaviors that ensue, family caregivers then may put themselves in greater jeopardy of burning out because of the way they've managed their emotions.
When you were sharing about that, it had me thinking about something I read where essentially asking ourselves, am I having a normal emotional response to this event? Right? I think a lot of times we want to not feel the pain of something or the hurt of something, but really if let's say for instance my child is sick, that is a normal response for me to feel sad and worried about that, right? And oftentimes we want to push away those emotions. So I really value that you talk about first, like normalize that what we're feeling is valid and a natural response to our circumstance, right?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest problems I see is that caregivers are often very hard on themselves. And if there's anything I've tried to do consistently throughout my career is to kind of take the onus of guilt off of them by helping them see that they're just like anybody else, and that they're not perfect, and that they're going to make mistakes. And as a matter of fact, even mothers sometimes get really irritated at having to take care of their kids. I mean, I shouldn't just say mothers, fathers too. I mean, it was my children are now adults having their own
Yeah.
children, but I mean, I vividly recall, having both kids for a day while my wife was out and feeling just like, oh my Lord, I can't wait for this day to end because it
Mhm.
was just too much.
Yeah.
those are normal feelings, and it doesn't make us a bad person. It doesn't make us a bad caregiver for us to
Right.
have them. It means that we need more support. And
Yeah.
so a lot of what I try to do is help people accept their feelings and then uh, treat themselves more kindly. Because the self-criticism rarely improves their caregiving performance. If anything, it just grinds them into the ground, and that's not what we want to happen.
Yeah, completely, completely. And how we talk to ourselves is everything. We can believe those narratives or choose to reframe and tell ourselves a different story. But it takes practice and it takes guidance at times to have someone encouraging us to see things a different way and be encouraged that we're not alone in it. Yeah.
Absolutely, because most times, even though we may have many acquaintances who've been caregivers, we're not expressing some of these uncomfortable feelings to them,
Mhm.
and because we're embarrassed by them. So we don't want them to know what we're all of the range of feelings that we're feeling. We want them to just believe that we're wonderful, perfect caregivers.
Mhm.
And we don't know that they're also having things that they're embarrassed about that they don't share with us. I believe it's one of the really great benefits of caregiver support groups is where people express the full range of feelings, and others in the room listening then feel validated in their own feelings. And it's so, certainly what goes on, there's a lot of things that go on in support group, including the provision of support and just shop talk and all that. But I think that one of the main benefits is to hear that I'm just like everybody else and there's nothing wrong with me. And and that I don't have to beat myself up because I'm somehow, imperfect or doing it wrong.
Thank you so much for encouraging us in that. There's all of those different emotions. You mentioned guilt, burden, angry, anxiety, right? We could go through a lot of those emotions that we feel. And anxiety is something that deeply can affect us and really impact the quality of our life. And it accompanies caregiving because it is such a big factor of the unknown and lack of control. How do you see this show up and manifest for people? But also, can you offer guidance on how we can help manage anxiety and caregiving in practical ways while still being present, not only for ourselves, but for the person we're caring for?
So let's first, Nicole, define what anxiety is, because I try in my writings to distinguish between worry and anxiety. So
Mm-hmm.
it's normal to worry. And actually, worry has some good evolutionary survival value, because when we worry about something or worry about a loved one, we're going to pay better attention to them and we're going to make better preparations to care for them. And so worry is a good thing. Uh, what anxiety is uncontrollable worry. It's where the worries that are circling in our head don't stop circling after we may have thought about a solution to a problem. They just keep going over it again and again and again. And anxiety is what happens at 3 in the morning when I wake up and I'm having anxiety about something I may be doing the next day or something I've done. And then it's interfering with my sleep. And then that doesn't help me perform better the next day. So worry is normal. Is a problem. And so in terms of how anxiety comes into caregiving, I can tell you, uh, in the years that I was a caregiver for my mom with dementia, I worried constantly about her falling because she was very unsteady on her feet and in fact fell a lot and fell and broke bones. And so I tried to be as overprotective as I could, even though that still didn't prevent her from falling at times. But I, it's one thing for me to be with her and to make sure she was using her walker and to walk behind her so that if she fell backward, I would catch her. But it's
Mhm.
another thing for me to be at work in the middle of a meeting and I'm not really focusing on the meeting. I'm thinking about my mom, and therefore that I'm very distracted and I'm not performing well at work. And so that 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 anxiety interfered with the rest of my life. And like most caregivers, I had multiple roles, not just as a caregiver, but as a husband and as a father and a worker in my job. So the best way to manage anxiety, as you mentioned before, is to really look at the kind of beliefs that we have. And that may mean really uh, taking into account that some of the things that we are worrying about are really low probability events. Like I
Mhm.
was going to worry that my mom was going to fall and hit her head. Well, it was possible, I suppose, but the chances of that happening were not high. And that for me to kind of go over that again and again and again in my mind didn't make my mother any safer. And it didn't, it, we had already changed her apartment around to try to reduce falls risks, but having done that, we were going to, she had to live. I couldn't put her in bubble wrap and make sure that she wasn't going to fall. She wasn't going to stand for that. And it didn't make sense for me to be anxious about it all the time. So
Mhm.
to be able to recognize what is likely to happen and what is really unlikely to happen, and the things that are unlikely to happen, don't really spend tremendous amount of time worrying about them because it doesn't bring you any closer to a solution.
Mhm.
So it's that consciousness of what we're thinking to really kind of step back and examine our own thoughts that allows us to better manage anxiety. It's not easy, right? It's easier said than done. It takes practice, but that's that's the primary way in psychology we use what's called cognitive behavioral therapy to manage anxiety. The other thing
Mhm.
we do is we really encourage people who are highly stressed, and caregivers are often highly stressed, to find ways of de-stressing. And if they have a means of relaxing, to really prescribe for them to exercise that means, whether that means reading or walking. Physical exercise is a great way of de-stressing. But when people are less stressed, then they're less likely to have those their normal worries blossom into anxiety.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 Finding the outlet for that. And that really also addresses the idea of how do we maintain our own identity through our caregiving, right? And at times I think we can struggle with feeling that we are losing our identity or individuality because now we're in this role. And that could be said for lots of different things, right? Being a parent, um, all of that. With that, do you have advice for caregivers who are wanting to maintain that, but feel like it's taking over and all consuming and losing themselves in that process?
I think it's very hard. I think um, caregiving can be all consuming, especially if the person you're caring for has increasing needs, and it just takes more and more time to care for them. And what you're doing is just more intricate and challenging. I think the easy answer to this is, and it's not easy, mind you, I'm being somewhat sarcastic, but the easy answer is we have to try to compartmentalize our lives as much as possible. And
Mhm.
so when we put our caregiving hat on, we are fully in that role and being the caregiver we can be. But when we turn towards some of the other roles in our lives, whether that be a spouse or a parent or um, an employee or a friend, then we fully inhabit those roles as well. That we're not allowing caregiving to intrude on those roles. I mean, I can just tell you that what happened in my marriage in the 7 years that I was caring for my stepfather with dementia and my mom with vascular dementia is that my wife, who's also a psychologist, recognized that my being a caregiver was really impacting our marriage. And
Mhm.
in so many words said to me, we really have to segregate our marriage from caregiving as best we can.
Mhm.
And that meant going out and not allowing the worries about my mom to become part. We weren't going to sit at dinner in some fancy restaurant and talk about my mom. That would be allowing caregiving to really intrude on what should have been a nice romantic evening with my wife. And so
Right.
we had to really take intentional steps to ensure that caregiving didn't seep into everything.
Well, that is a very good segue to my next question about love and life and meaning, as we are aging, but also in caregiving, it does impact relationships. uh, they can change, right? Being intentional about how we stay connected while we're going through this time. And do you find that that is a topic that comes up in your conversations? And how do you see relationships change in caregiving?
I think relationships change because people change. Caregivers are changed by their experience. I think, I mean, I sometimes see folks that believe that, they're taking kind of a respite from, temporary sabbatical from their real lives and they do caregiving. And when caregiving is over, they're going to go back to their quote unquote real lives.
Mm.
But that never happens. People, who they are has changed. And consequently, how they relate to people change, how they think of themselves, their purpose in the world changes. And,
Yeah.
again, talking specifically about marriage and my own marriage, I mean, what happened in my marriage is my wife and I had been married, a good 20 years before I really became a kind of intensive caregiver. And we had a very good marriage. And I would say we even have a better marriage now because during the long years of caregiving, my wife was my best support, my best friend. She was incredibly reliable and incredibly empathetic, and I gained new respect for her, and so it really deepened our relationship. I
Mhm.
would also say that there were folks that who didn't really understand everything I was doing as a caregiver, like friends who didn't understand why I couldn't go out and do things or why I might need to leave early because I needed to go check on my mom or whatever responsibilities I had. And because they hadn't been caregivers themselves and they didn't really have any experience with the role, they couldn't quite get it. And they were not as supportive and they thought I was in some ways they were judging me for being um, doing too much. But and that probably harmed my relationships with them. My relationship with my brother was harmed by caregiving, unfortunately, because particularly early on, he was unwilling to step in and help care for my mom. He thought um, that that it should be up to me for a variety of reasons, and I was very resentful of him about that. And we've come a long way, he and I, in the years since to try to repair our relationship, but a lot of damage was done because he didn't step up as I thought he should.
Right.
So relationships are certainly changed by caregiving. Um,
Yeah.
and I again, getting back to the identity question, there th we have limited time in this world. I mean, what kind of positive difference do we want to make? And if caring for someone else isn't a prime way of making a positive difference, I don't know what is.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I really value the privilege of being able to care for my mom in
Mhm.
hindsight. And I also uh, want to make sure that that the folks that are in my life, the folks that I prioritize spending time with, value those same things.
Mhm.
I'm not just out to go have a good time. I want people who want to make that difference as well.
Right. Yeah. That's such good insight. It is. There's the family support and our emotional health, right? That's so important. But there's also a healthcare system that we are faced with and need to navigate and work with. And you're a big advocate for how do these systems support family caregivers? Where do you see some of the biggest gaps in support? And do you have any suggestions on what we can do to change that?
So, just a little bit more about my background. I mean, I've been a psychologist for many years, but for 24 of those years, I worked as a faculty member in a family medicine residency program here outside of Philadelphia,
Mm.
teaching family doctors about behavioral aspects of family medicine, including how to communicate with patients and how to provide emotional support to them. And a lot of what I try to teach the residents I work with is not just how to connect with patients, but how to connect with their family members.
Mhm.
And I saw barriers that were built within the primary care system to that. So if you
Mhm.
take some very well-meaning and energetic and eager and really idealistic people, and you put them in the primary care role
Mm.
to take care of patients, but you don't give them enough time to include family in that. Well,
Yeah.
then what happens is, even though they don't want to exclude family from conversations, they do, because they have to move through their days very quickly. Otherwise, they fall behind on their patients. They get late for appointments. Patients are angry at them. Staff is angry at them, and so the system is very much organized around time, and that means that families are seen as kind of a not a must have, but an extra, and something that, even if it might be effective, even might be helpful to patients, support families, and even if it might be effective to help those family caregivers themselves, it's secondary or even tertiary. It's not. It's just not always possible.
Right.
And so we need we need larger system change, and that means, places like Medicare paying for primary care doctors and other clinicians to spend time with patients' family members. And so Medicare is getting a little bit better than that, but we have much further to go. But also, we have um, the physicians themselves have to get comfortable with this idea of interacting with families, because most clinicians don't have a lot of training in that. And I'm not just talking about doctors; I'm talking about across the board.
Right.
And so they're at a disadvantage in doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what can caregivers do? Well, I think first and foremost, they have to understand some of the pressures that doctors are under, and not just be very aggressive with them or be very critical of them, because those things don't work. You alienate doctors lickety split if you do that.
Right.
And
Right.
so, because the time is of the essence in the medical profession, the thing that I mainly recommend is to kind of use that to your advantage as a caregiver. So
Mm.
show up with a yellow legal pad in hand on which you have written questions, and don't put it on your phone, right? Because your phone is not visible enough. You want a nice big legal, yellow legal pad. It's almost like a screaming out loud to the physician, you don't get out of this room until we answer the
Right.
questions on this pad here.
I like
And
that.
and I've literally, physicians will pay a lot of attention to that pad, because they know that to get onto the next patient, they best go through that. And sometimes I've seen physicians literally rip the legal pad out of the hands of a family member to be able to go through the questions and answer them as quickly as possible.
Mm.
But it becomes a way of getting the physician's attention.
Mm.
And also, so that's one suggestion. The other suggestion is that I really believe that family caregivers should really offer themselves as partners for doctors, to say, hey, I'm here to support the treatment plan that you've come up with. I want to give you the right information so that you can make a good treatment plan. I want to go home and try to implement your treatment plan and tell you how it's going. I want to then come back to you and report to you what I'm seeing, so that you can make your very best clinical determinations
Mm.
in conference with the patient and myself about how we can come up with the best plan. So when you partner in that way, when you kind of reach your hand out and say, let's do this together,
Mm.
physicians will appreciate that,
Yeah.
especially if you can say in very concrete ways, my loved one has diabetes. I'm going to keep a log of all their diabetic readings, and I'm going to bring them in for you, so that I'm
Mhm.
going to hand them to you when you walk in the door, or I'm even going to email them to you beforehand, so you have them to review before the medical appointment, so that the medical appointment can go more efficiently.
Mhm.
So when doctors see that you're on their side, they will really embrace you as a partner in care, and they'll treat you with a different kind of respect.
Right. Right. I love having that visual of this is my expectation is that we're going to go through these questions, right? Kind of setting that stage. Yeah. Is there a billing code for family conversation or consultation, or is that part of
Yeah,
the
it's part of the
connection, the
Medicare.
challenge? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's part of the Medicare physician fee schedule.
Okay.
I can't give you the number off the top of my head. I just don't know it, but it
Right.
was introduced several years ago,
Okay.
and currently it's severely underutilized. And the reason it's
Mm-hmm.
underutilized is it's priced too low.
Got
It's
it.
like, so a lot of physicians are just not inclined to do it because because there's not enough compensation there.
Yeah.
That's one reason. The other reason is because again, they're just unaccustomed to working with family members and they are uncomfortable with it. And
Right.
they're always afraid that the family is somehow going to get between them and the patient rather than seeing that the family is there to support them in their
Yeah.
relationship and treatment plan with the patient.
Right, right. And when you share that, is that what you mean by when you talk about having a like a well-designed family-centered care model? Is that what you're referencing?
Absolutely. So, as you I'm sure know, I mean, one of the big trends in all of healthcare in the last 15 years has been this idea of we need to have person-centered care or patient-centered care. And so what the idea of that is that we don't just dictate, the physicians don't dictate, no one in healthcare dictates to a patient what, physician doesn't say, this is what I want you to do, right? That's like, it's asking patients to obey you. And that's obnoxious in this day and age. That's not how maybe that worked 40 years ago. It doesn't work anymore.
Mm.
What it really is you want the patient to be participating in the formation of the plan. So there's been
Mhm.
this tremendous emphasis in training and practice on establishing person-centered care. My
Mhm.
my problem with that is person-centered care is almost to the exclusion of the family. The family then becomes more marginalized. What we want is person and family-centered care that includes a family point of view, that includes the family as an observer of treatment, observer of symptoms, and really takes into account the home context of treatment, because that's where people live, right? There's the idea that we're going to give a treatment in a 15-minute appointment or a 10-minute appointment or a 7-minute appointment in some office somewhere, and then think that it's going to apply to really well to the rest of life makes no sense.
Mhm.
But family lives with the person. They buy the food. They see their, observe their behavior. They make sure they take their medicines. There's so many things that families involved with. It really needs to be more family centered to be more effective, in my opinion.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And that is the conversation, right? Why it's so important to still and continue to educate and share about how families are such a support system. I've had conversation with senior living providers about how families really still view themselves as a caregiver, even though their loved one is living in a community, right? Just all of the um, tasks and mental load and relationship and things like that. And so, really having the education and the conversation about how families are really intricately involved and the importance of having it be this, yeah, family-centered care model, which
I,
still accounts for the patient's voice, right?
right. It's not saying, the patient doesn't count anymore. We're just going to listen to the family member. That's not it at all. It's about getting a range, the full range of opinions. And what you say is absolutely true. And that is, if a patient or an individual goes into a continuing care retirement community or assisted living, the family does not stop being involved
Mm,
and feeling a sense of responsibility to that person. Their role changes, but the role doesn't disappear. And I mean, I certainly experienced this when my mother and stepfather went into skilled nursing facilities at various times.
mhm.
Unfortunately, I will tell you in my experience, and I do a lot of training for senior living facilities, I don't often see that family centered perspective. I mean, they see families as kind of like the complainers, the people are going to come to you when there's a problem,
Right.
and when the problem comes up, the executive directors often are fielding these calls when it escalates that high, and then they're going to their skills for helping family members calm down, so they could be very irate.
Mhm.
But that's not seeing families as a resource that you can draw
Right.
upon to help the patient live more comfortably in your community. And
Yeah,
that I think is missing out on a real strength.
right.
And families want to participate. They want to, if you're having events,
Mhm.
family members want to attend. If there's some care issues, family want to hear about it and make suggestions, and so that, and when they visit, they want to use the right techniques, and they want to have a relationship with the nurses aides, and they want to be part and parcel of everything that goes on, and not be not be quote unquote visitors, which is again to family members is just abhorrent. I mean, this idea that I'm visiting my loved one. This is my loved one. I want to be with them. I'm going to spend time with them. They
Yeah.
happen to be living here, but it doesn't mean, I mean, I'm an outsider to
Right.
this. I shouldn't be an outsider to this environment.
Right. Completely. You said that so well. And I agree. We're on that mission together of bringing families together and having it be that comprehensive support system. In your work, right, decades of supporting and learning and studying, what's the one thing that you wish people knew about caregiving?
Um, well, I could answer that multiple ways. So one way is, and this concerns me a lot. So this is going back in time a little bit. There was a lot of energy spent in the 80s, 90s, and maybe early 2000s to really publicize that we have this phenomenon in this country called caregiving, especially as our country is aging. More and more people are caring for older adults, and this is a really hard role, and it's going to really tax you. Now, it is a hard role.
Mhm.
It does tax you, but I don't want to. It's like I think we've gone a little bit overboard, and we've painted the caregiving, being a caregiver, as like this entirely negative experience.
Mhm.
That this is going to be a nightmare for you, and
Mhm.
it's not the case. I mean, the case is for most people, it's hard, but in hindsight, after it's over, it will tell you this was hard, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
And the reason that they're glad that they did it is because it's very gratifying to know that you're making that kind of difference in the life of someone you love.
Right.
And there are not too many roles we have in life where the stakes are that high.
Mhm.
There are folks that I've heard who say this was the most important thing I've done in my life. And I mean, it was really hard, but I'm so glad I did this.
Yeah.
And that I want folks to, when they go into this, or when the challenge is posed to them, or or another way of saying is when the opportunity comes up,
Mhm.
and a parent needs help or a spouse needs help, I don't want them to go into this with a sense of dread. I want them to go into this knowing they've got to learn, they've got to gain skills, they have got to take care of themselves, and they're going to do something which is a very powerful behavior for their loved one and for themselves. And at the end of the day, they're going to come out of this, in my opinion, a better person.
Wow.
And that's how I want people to see caregiving.
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful encouragement. And what a beautiful lens and reflection that we can take with us. Yeah. You've had different books that you've authored. We will include those in our episode description, but you've got a new one coming out in July. And I want you to share about that. But I also want to say I love the format. It is so easy to look at and navigate. So I'm looking forward for this. And yeah, tell us more.
Well, thank you, Nicole, for the chance to tell you more. The book is called the AARP Caregiver Answer Book, and it's being published by Guilford Press. And the purpose of the book is for us to give the kinds of answers, myself and my wife, Julia Mayer, who's also a psychologist and who also does a lot of work in the caregiving space. Um, for the past 30 plus years, we've had clients, friends, neighbors, uh, colleagues ask us questions about caregiving because they know that we have specialized in this for a long time. And the questions range from everything about how to handle the emotions to how to talk to doctors to how to buy a commode to how to deal with insurance companies. I mean, it's just a whole range of things. And so what we did is we wrote a book that contains all the most common questions we've heard and the typical answers we give to these questions. And we made it lively and really nice bite-sized questions and answers to go right to the point. But
Mhm.
the purpose of this is to be very pragmatic, to give people the info they need on a whole range of topics that are likely to come up during the course of their caregiving.
Yeah.
And we're giving our own. We pull together a lot of research. We pull together lots of case stories, lots of anecdotes. But the idea is to really illustrate the how to, and I'm hoping it's of real use to people.
Yeah, completely. And when we are in it, we need those. Okay, I've got a question. What's that answer to that question? I think that's so helpful, and digestible, right? Which is what we want. So thank you for putting all of your thought and care and compassion into that. And I'm excited for people to dive in along with the other books and articles that you've written. You contribute to AARP and also have a website which we can visit. Tell us more. How can we connect with you? Where can people follow your work?
So I would recommend two things. So one is the website that we actually put together for our last book, which was called Love and Meaning After 50, which is a book about marriage after 50. Um, it's called www.loveandmeaning.com. Very simple. We're in the process of updating that website for the new book. But the other way is, I've written columns on self-help columns on family caregiving on the AARP website since 2013. If you put into a search engine AARP Barry Jacobs, it'll bring you to a page which will have the last maybe 18 or 20 columns I've written. At this point, I've done maybe 100 of them. So, but they're again on a wide range of topics. All the articles are about 750 to 1,000 words, so it doesn't take a lot of time to read, and it contains there's a lot of psychological information, but also covers some other topics too. And so with loveandmeaning.com and the AARP.org website, I think you'll get plenty of information about me if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you for that. I will include all of that. And oh, you have so much to share, and I'm so appreciative of that. It's really what we need to know we're not alone, we're supportive, we've got tools, there's information, there's resource. Thank you, Barry, for all that you provide for us. It's definitely so helpful and so needed. So thank you for the conversation today as well.
Thank you, Nicole. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.